G'day everybody, welcome back to part 2 of Azure RoundUP, Azure Functions with Janhavi and Turko. So Janhavi, hand back over to you so you can cover off the second part of your talk.
Thank you, George, and hi everyone. So today we are going to continue from part 1. So in this part, we are going to look at what are the different deployment options for Azure Functions. We are also going to look at how the scaling happens, and then we'll understand what are the costs for the consumption plan. Then we'll look at the security and some of the best practices. Okay, so let's get going. So last time in the part 1, we stopped here at the demo of the bindings. Now we want to talk about different deployment options for Azure Functions. So you have got your function ready, you want to deploy it. Now there are different ways you could do that. You could do tool-based deployment, which means you can use your Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code or even your core tools, which are the command line tools to deploy. You can do the deployment using the app service managed deployment. So you can do like continuous integration and continuous deployment. So you can set up your CI/CD. And the third option you have is external pipelines, like you can use GitHub Actions or you can use Azure Pipeline. Okay. So to do that, what you could do is I'm going to go to my Azure portal. So here I am at my Azure portal. And let's say that I have got this function app. So I'm just going to go here and let's say this is my function app. And I want to do the deployments through different options. So if we go here, we have got here deployment center. And in the deployment center, then you have got these options to set up either the Azure App Service Managed deployment, which means the one which is based on the Kudu service, or you could pick up the one which has got the GitHub or Azure Pipelines option. So here we can select where our source code is. So you can see we have got two options: manual deployment, that's the app service based one, so makes use of the Kudu service. And then here we have got the continuous deployment. So you can make use of GitHub, you can make use of Bitbucket, or you can also make use of Azure repos. So if I have selected GitHub, I need to make sure I authorize with GitHub, and then I have to choose the code, like the repo where my code is, and then I can set up and it creates here a YAML file for you. If I choose Azure repos, then I'll have to do this from Azure repos, okay? So you have got two options here. You can select app service or you can go with Azure pipelines. Now, if you go with Azure pipelines, then you have to go to the Azure repo, like Azure DevOps, and from there set up the pipeline, and then you'll be able to deploy. And then few other options are there, like you can use external Git or you can use OneDrive also. So you can use personal OneDrive. This is not the business one, so you can use that. And also Dropbox. So if you want to deploy from Dropbox, then you could do that as well. So those are different deployment options. Now, once you have deployed your source code, the folder structure of your application looks like this. So at the top level, you have got the function app, which is your host. And this is where your host.json is going to be, where you have got all the configuration files, configuration of your Azure function app. And then you have got different functions. So in your function app, you'll have multiple functions. So you'll have, let's say, I have got my first function and then second function, and each of those, they'll have their own function.json, which is the configuration of the function itself, where you have got the bindings and the triggers mentioned. And then there will be some common code like a shared code or bin. So that's kind of the folder structure that you are going to have after your deployment. And we can see that when we go to the Azure portal, if I go here, scroll down, and then I have got here advanced editor. Okay, so app service editor. So I can go here, and this is going to show me the code that I have got for my functions. Okay, so this is where if you are into, let's say, PowerShell or something, then you could come here and you could make changes directly here as well. But if it's a compiled code, then you will be making changes in your code editor, and then you are going to deploy that and you're going to show it here. So here we have, so this one is a PowerShell based one. So you can see I have got this run.ps one, which is my PowerShell. So I could come here and I can make changes directly. But if it's a compiled one, then I'll have bin folder and a shared folder where my DLLs are going to go. And then I'll have different function folders like this. Okay, so that's how my folder structure will be for all the functions. Now, when we are deploying this, we saw in the part 1 that there are different options for you to choose for the hosting plans. Okay, so there's a consumption plan. Now, this consumption plan is a fully serverless. So when you're using the consumption plan, instances of the Azure function host, they are dynamically added and removed based on your number of incoming events. Okay, so you will have to decide, like, not you will have to decide, but depending on what event trigger you have, the consumption plan will decide how your function will be scaled and how many instances are to be added. Okay.
Yeah.
So that makes it fully serverless hosting option. And this will then scale automatically even during the periods of high loads. Like if your load increases drastically, then also that addition of instances is happening automatically. So when you are running the functions in the consumption plan, you are going to then be charged for the compute resources only when your functions are running. So if you have got this massive surge, you'll be charged, and if your number of requests come down, the charge will come down. Eventually it can become zero. And also you have to remember one thing is on the consumption plan, your function execution times out after a configurable period of time. Okay, so there are specific timeouts on each of the plans actually. And your billing is based on number of executions, the execution time, and the memory that's used. Okay, so the usage will be aggregated.
So it's not appropriate for every single type of piece of code that you want to write.
Yeah, so you have to consider whether you are okay with the cold start. So what happens with the consumption plan is eventually the instances, they'll be zero. Now, if the next request, when it comes, if there are no instances, that means it starts from creating the instance. So there's going to be a little bit of latency there. Okay, so that latency is the cold start. Now, if you want to avoid that, then you could go with the premium plan. Okay, now in the premium plan also, you have got instances which are added dynamically and removed based on the number of incoming requests. But then there are other benefits, like you can avoid the cold start by having that perpetually warm instances. You also get virtual network connectivity. So if you want to think about the security, you might want to put your function app in a virtual network so that you can connect to specific services in Azure and you can control how the requests are going to that function. Okay. Also, you get unlimited execution here. Okay, and you have got a 60-minute execution guarantee. Okay, now here you get the instance sizes, which are 2 cores or 1 core, 2 core, and 4 cores. So you get that instance sizes, and the pricing here is more predictable. Okay. Then the last option we have is dedicated plan. Now this is same as what we get in the app services, so web apps. Okay, so there we have got these basic plan, or we have got the standard plan, and we have got the premium plan, right? So those are part of the app service plan. So you could pick that, or you could even pick the app service environment or the isolated one if you want. So you do have that option. So this option you set when you are creating a function app. So if I go back to here, my function apps, and I go to create, and then in here, let's just select one resource group. And if I go to this hosting, right, here we are choosing those. So consumption, serverless. Now we don't really have any other option for consumption because everything happens automatically. If you choose the premium, then here you can choose this elastic premium. There are 3 options here, like P1, P2, and P3. And you also see these features, like you have got the rapid scale and the VNet and high density, custom domains if you need them, and traffic manager is also there, so you can route the traffic based on specific conditions. Okay, so you get that. Yeah, so this is our premium. And if we go for app service plan, then again we have got all those same options as the app services. So you could go with basic, like these ones. And then you have got the premium, which is part of app service. So this premium is different than the premium of functions. Okay, this is where you get the dedicated infrastructure. And then we have got the standard, and we can go isolated as well, which is the app service environment.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are different options. Yeah.
And I was just going to say, for those watching who don't know what an app service plan is, essentially it's compute or a PaaS compute unit where we can have multiple types of PaaS services such as functions, web apps, and a few other services.
Yep. Cool. So we have got this hosting plan. Now these are in Azure, but you can host your functions in other ways also. Like you can host in Kubernetes, you can host on IoT edge devices, or you can host your function locally as well. So you have got all those other options also. But here we are just focusing on Azure in this particular option here. Then we also want to understand how the scaling works, especially when it comes to your consumption plan. You want to know what's happening behind the scenes, but the scaling is going to work the same way for all. So in the consumption and premium plans, your Azure function, it scales the CPU and the memory resources by adding additional instances of the function host. So the number of instances, that is decided on the number of events that are going to trigger the function. So Azure Function uses this component which is called as a scale controller. Okay, so to monitor the rate of the events and decide whether to scale out or whether to scale in. So this scale controller, it makes use of heuristics for each type of trigger. For example, let's say you are using a queue storage as a trigger. So this is going to scale based on the queue length and also the age of the oldest queue message. So if the length has grown too much and also there are lots of old messages still pending, that means you need to increase your scale, so it will add the instances. So it makes use of that length and the oldest message. Likewise, for each type of trigger, there will be some parameters that based on which it decides how to scale. Okay, so the unit of scale here for Azure Function is basically your function app, full function app. Okay, so the function app is scaled out, additional resources are allocated to run multiple instances of that Azure Function host. So you will see that there are these additional instances being added. Now, if the compute demand is reduced, the scale controller removes the function host instances, and the number of instances eventually will be scaled into 0. Okay, when no functions are running within that function. So after that instance is scaled to 0, the next request has the added latency. So the latency we talked about, which is the cold start. Okay, so there will be some latency. Now, if your cold start is impacting your functions, you can consider either premium plan or you can go with the dedicated plan. And in the dedicated plan, you can set up always on, okay, setting enabled. So you don't have that cold start problem there. Okay. Now scaling, it will vary on a number of different factors, and the scale and it will scale differently based on the trigger and the language that you have selected. So if you have selected C# or Python, that also makes difference on how it will be scaled. Then there is a timeouts also. So functions execution times out. So the timeout duration of the function app is defined by the function timeout property, which is in the host.json. So you will see that in your host.json file, you can add this function timeout property. Now for the consumption plan, the default is 5 minutes and you can go up to maximum of 10 minutes. For the premium plan, the default is 30 and you can go, so -1 here means unlimited or unbounded. Okay. Same for dedicated, you can go 30 or -1 means unbounded. Now premium plan execution, although technically it is unbounded, it guarantees 60 minutes execution. Okay, so that's a guaranteed execution time. And the -1 here is the unbounded execution, but you should always keep in mind that don't go for unbounded, keep some number here, okay? So that way it makes it better performing.
So is there and I guess there's an obvious risk with that, but what in your mind would be the biggest risk by setting an unbounded maximum?
So if you have got it unbounded maximum, you are thinking like your code is going to run like for so long time. It's going to hard for the function app to understand like what's happening, whether I want to scale, whether I don't want to scale. So it's always a good idea that your code, the way you write it, it is written such that it finishes in certain time. And then that will then help the underlying infrastructure to scale in, scale out, easily understand what's happening in your request, how many requests are coming. If it's unbounded execution, then it's like just going on and you don't really know what's happening, right? So
Yeah.
it's always
Right.
a good idea to have a upper limit in there.
Yeah. Okay. Especially, I guess, if you've got a bug in your code and it's
Yeah.
stuck in a loop or something.
Yeah.
It's good advice.
Okay. So consumption plan, we know that it is adding and removing instances dynamically. So because it's doing this dynamically, you want to know like how much it's going to cost when you are going to run it for a certain period. Okay, it's not like your premium or dedicated where you are choosing a plan which has got an estimated value already. Here you don't have that estimated value, so you want to be able to estimate that. So the execution cost of a single function execution, it's measured in GB seconds. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And this is calculated by combining your memory usage and the execution time. So the function that runs for longer costs more. So does a function that consumes more memory. So when you're estimating your overall cost of running your functions in any plan, remember that the function runtime uses different Azure services as well, which are billed separately, like your storage account. So for functions running in the consumption plan, your total cost is the execution cost of your functions plus the cost of maybe bandwidth and additional services like your storage account or application insights, or if you're using Cosmos DB with it, then it's a Cosmos DB, which is a separate cost.
Yeah.
Now you can use pricing calculator to get an estimate of how much it will cost to run this function app. Now to better understand the cost impact of your functions, you can use Azure Monitor to view cost related metrics which are currently being generated. So for example here, this is from Azure Monitor. I have got here two matrix selected, function execution count, and then there is function unit. So I'm just gonna zoom in here. So function execution count and function execution unit. And based on that, I can then come up with like how much time it's running and how much, what's the execution count and what is the execution unit. And then I can take that, go to the pricing calculator, and then I can calculate. So to get this one, what you can do is you can go in your Azure Monitor. So here I have got my Azure Monitor.
Mm-hmm.
You can go in Matrix, and then you have to make sure that you choose a function app to do this. So let's say I want to create a new chart here. Now I have got selected my scope. So here you can go and select your scope and make sure it's a function app, okay? And then what we need is we need to have this matrix, which is function execution count. You can select the sum, and then you also want to add another matrix here, and I can select the function execution unit. And then it will give me that execution time and execution count. And then I can take that and I can go to the pricing calculator. So when I go to pricing calculator here, what I have done is I have selected Azure Functions. So in the pricing calculator, you can see here Azure Functions. And the pricing calculator, you can just search for Azure Pricing Calculator and it will bring you that link. So you go there and here you have got the Azure Functions. And for the consumption, you get like first 400,000 GB per second execution and 1 million executions are free. And then you have got here memory and the execution time and the executions per month, which you can get from the monitor. And then you can come up with the estimated cost for that. Okay. So this is how you could check it. Or you could even check it, your cost for your function by directly going to the function itself and see cost analysis for that resource group and how much individual resource is costing. So that's another way to find out the cost there.
Got it.
And then we talk about the security, which is the most important thing when we are deploying our services. So what are the things that we need to do or we can do or what we have got? So you've got the security center, which integrates with your function app in the portal. So this provides you a quick assessment of your potential configuration related security vulnerabilities, and that's free. And then you have got the function apps. If they are running in the dedicated plan, they can also use real-time security features of Security Center for an additional cost. Now, one way to detect your attacks is through the activity monitoring and logging analytics. So functions integrates with application insights to collect the logs and the performance and the error data for your function app. And you can use application insights, which will automatically detect performance anomalies or include some kind of powerful analytics tool to help you diagnose different issues and to understand how your functions are used. Okay. And functions also integrates with Azure Monitor logs to enable you to consolidate function app logs with different systems and easier analysis. You can make it to require HTTPS. So by default, client can connect over HTTP or HTTPS, but it's always a good idea to keep HTTPS so you get that secure connection here and encrypted and authenticated. Then you have got the function keys. So function lets you to use keys to make it harder to access your HTTP function endpoints during your dev. So unless the HTTP access level on the HTTP triggered function is set to anonymous, requests they need to be then have that key in whenever they are making the call. Okay, so you can make use of that key, either function level or the admin level. Or the best option is you can set up authentication authorization. So you can integrate with Azure Active Directory, or you can make use of the API management to authenticate the request. So those are different options that you could implement when it comes to security. And finally, some of the best practices for your Azure functions. So you should make sure that you don't create large, long-running functions because they can cause unexpected timeout issues. Okay, so whenever possible, you should refactor large functions into small functions and set that work together and return responses fast. Okay. Then if you need to have cross-function communication, and you could use durable functions, or you can make use of Azure Logic Apps, which are built to manage the state transitions and communication between multiple functions. If you do not want to use that, then you could make use of something like a queue storage or something to maintain that state. And third thing is you write the functions stateless. Okay, so your functions should always be stateless, and you associate any required state information with your data. For example, in order processing, if you're doing that, then it's going to have the associated state member. Okay, so order information. Now, your function could process an order based on that state, while the function itself remains stateless in that scenario. And fourth thing is always write defensive function. So assume your function could encounter an exception at any time. So when you design your function, you should design it with the ability to continue from that previous fail point during the next execution. Okay. So that's another way of implementing function, or another best practice, if you like. Okay, so those were best practices. And I've got one more thing, which is the last for this video, which is a use case. Okay, so I just want to talk about this one. So as a trainer, I'm always telling people in different courses that you can use Azure Monitor and you can connect with Azure Functions and then use that to do different things. Now, what are these different things and how can you really use Azure Functions? So I have implemented here one of the functions. So I'm just going to go to this function apps, and this is my function, which is going to send the alerts from Azure Monitor to Teams. Okay, now a lot of companies, they have got Teams and their support teams might be using Teams there. They might have the team like this, and let's say they want to get alerts in the team, so the support team gets notified that something happened and they can start the triage from here itself, right? So for that, I have created this function. Now, what this function does is whenever there is an alert in the Azure Monitor, it sends this particular message like this into Teams. So what I need to do, I have created this alert rule. And in the alert rule, we have got different actions, right? So here we have got these different actions set up. Now, this particular demo AG01 I have, this one has got an action type, which is Azure function. And it is going to this particular function, which is Azure Monitor alert to Teams, which is my function app here, right? So I've set it up like that. Now, whenever there will be an alert generated, so if this is for my web application, so if the CPU goes beyond certain limit, I want to be alerted. My team wants to be alerted.
Yeah.
So this one is then going to send alert like this, where my team will know that this alert was fired, and then we have got, so I have set up the auto scaling as well. So whenever the CPU goes beyond certain level, the scaling happens and then it gets resolved. So the condition, monitor condition here is resolved because the scaling has happened, right? So I can get this implemented really easily. It's a simple function which is going to just send these alerts to Teams directly in the Teams channel. And in the Teams, we have got this ability to get the webhook. So I've got this webhook of this particular channel, get the channel link. And then I can use that to send that message to my team. So that's like a use case that I always talk about when I do my training. So here we can use Azure Functions. Okay, and if the number of alerts increase, the function will scale accordingly. Another use case which I implement, so this I used to implement in my earlier role, where people wanted to do something on SharePoint Online. Now we are used to, before SharePoint Online, everybody was used to implementing things on premises. But with the SharePoint Online, there are restrictions. Now, a lot of those things you could do using Azure Functions. So you can use functions to interact with SharePoint Online and do certain things. So I can make use of my functions for those kind of things as well. Yeah. So some of the use cases to think about when you're working with functions.
Cool. That sounds great, mate. I think the potential of getting those monitor alerts out of people's inboxes, because traditionally you end up seeing people basically just creating a rule that just goes and to another folder and they just ignore it, whereas if they can get a proper alert and come through and they get it in Teams and actually get a proper active alert in Teams, that might actually be a better option. So really good use case, mate, because you can see that functions can be quite customized to whatever particular scenario you've got.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. All right, so that was end of our part 2.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, mate. I really appreciate you covering off both of those. And as always, I've learnt something new sitting in these sessions. It's amazing what you learn from other people. So, Janhavi, thank you very much for doing our part 1 and part 2. And I believe we're also going to do a durable functions Azure Functions session as well. So look out for that. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. So thanks again, Janhavi. See you soon.
Thank you.